be upstanding to the Worshipful Mair, Councillor Habermel.
Toni, I'm the leader of Southend-on-Sea City Council and will be chairing today's proceedings. I'll begin today's proceedings by asking the Mayor to light a Holocaust candle. This is one of 70 candles distributed in 2015 across the UK to commemorate 70 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. Thank you all for coming today to support this event, which keeps alive the memories of those who have suffered atrocities. In the world in which we live, there continues to be conflict and unrest. It is particularly important today we can reflect on Holocaust Memorial Day and the desire to learn from previous atrocities across the world. I now call upon the Mayor's Chaplain, Reverend Habermel, to lead us in prayer.
Eternal God, you know us through, and you care for each and every human life. All people throughout the world and across time are cherished as your beloved children, no matter how ordinary or extraordinary their story. On this day, we raise up to you the victims of the Holocaust. We lament the loss of the 6 million Jews who were killed, the millions of other victims of Nazi persecution, and victims of other genocides. We remember those who lost their lives, and those who cannot forget what they endured and witnessed. May we honour each one of them and bear witness to their lives in our own context by advocating for, remembering and recognising the sanctity of each human life, knowing that all people, irrespective of race, religion, nationality, sexuality or ability, are made in your image. Help us all to turn away from hatred, intolerance and division, to relish diversity and to build a world where genocide is no more. Strengthen us so that we in our ordinary lives may witness to your extraordinary love in this place and thus be a transforming presence in a troubled world. Amen.
I'm now pleased to introduce Rabbi Geoffrey from the Southend and Westcliff Hebrew congregation to reflect on the theme of 2024, fragility of freedom.
Worshipful Mair, Chairman Councillor Cox, distinguished guests, friends all, thank you for inviting me, joined by the Southend and Westcliff People congregation to address you today. We are truly grateful to the City Council of Southend for arranging today's Holocaust Memorial Day event. I share with you a reflection on this year's theme, the fragility of freedom. The Second World War, 1939 to 1945, the Holocaust, are stark reminders of what the fragility of freedom really looks like. Across the globe, the Second World War resulted in some 70 to 85 million deaths. During those bitter 6 years, genocides were rife and civilian life was extremely harsh. For all, life was truly bereft of freedom. As the war progressed, news of the widespread genocide of the Jews was brought to the attention of the world. But between the collaborators, in the silences of the many, there was little done to save the Jews. After the war, death of 6 million Jews was revealed for all to see. The Holocaust is the worst ever recorded genocide of any one people in the history of humankind. For the past 79 years, the world has witnessed further genocide. And today, on Holocaust Memorial Day, we remember all who have lost their lives. Today, remembering these horrific crimes against humanity, we acknowledge how fragile freedom is. But sadly, it is a lesson hanging by a thread. Well, on the 7th of October 2023, just under 4 months ago, in Israel, where many were celebrating the most joyous day in the Jewish calendar, Simchat Torah, thousands of Hamas terrorists from Gaza breached the security border fence between them and Israel and invaded southern Israel. At the same time, Hamas fired thousands of rockets into Israel. The invading terrorists went on the rampart, shooting, slaughtering, mailing, raping, and burning innocent civilians, and even kidnapped people and took them back to Gaza. Let us remember that these were not terrorists acting against the government of Gaza, for it is in actual fact Hamas, a terrorist organization who govern Gaza, which is basically a Palestinian state. On the 7th of October, the people of Israel woke up to this horrific attack. How fragile is freedom. These terrorists, the Hamas, have broken every code of human conduct. Their barbaric acts left no alternative to Israel other than to invade Gaza, protect its own citizens, and to bring back the hostages. The war in Gaza has impacted hugely on life in the region, and so we witness again the fragility of freedom. In the aftermath of the 7th of October, I am shocked and deeply saddened by the rise in anti-Semitism across the globe. The world seems to have forgotten the atrocities of the 7th of October and deny the right of Israel to defend its borders. Yes, war is ugly, and tragically civilian lives suffer, but such an atrocity cannot be tolerated. Israel is fighting a very difficult war against its Hamas enemies, who hide among its citizens of Gaza, using them as human shields. And that is not propaganda. That is the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Let us remember, too, that Gaza is still holding some 132 Israeli hostages. The State of Israel was created in 1948 and recognized by the United Nations in order to give safe haven to Jews suffering persecution elsewhere in the world. Apart from the many displaced Jews of Europe who settled in Israel after the Holocaust, there were nearly 1 million Jews who settled in Israel from Arab and other Muslim countries due to persecution. Israel today is a democratic state that offers freedom to all its citizens, Jew and non-Jew alike. It is multifaceted and diverse. There is hope that someday in the future we will witness peace in Israel, with all its surrounding neighbours, freedom for all. As we reflect today on the Holocaust and the fragility of freedom, let us pray and hope that there will be a renewed effort to learn its lessons, that we will witness a better tomorrow. I conclude with a prayer composed by the late Rabbi Sachs. Sovereign of the universe, who created all in love, teach us to love all that is good and beautiful in this world. Teach us to recognize that one who is not in our image is nonetheless in your image. Teach us to see your trace in the face of a stranger. Help us to live in peace with one another, respecting one another's deeply held beliefs, though they are not ours. And help us never to forget that the people not like us are still people like us. As you reach out your hand to us, so may we reach out our hand to the stranger, the lonely, the poor, and the homeless, heeding their unspoken word, hearing their silent cry. By our gracious and loving kindness to one another, may we merit your grace, your loving kindness, your peace, and your presence among us here on earth.
Thank you, Rabbi Hahn. I will now hand over to Rabbi Olf from the Southend District Reform Synagogue to introduce our speakers, Mr. Philip Shaw and Mr. Ivan Shaw.
Good afternoon. Welcome, especially to Mair, to representatives and members of all communities and schools and everyone else taking part in the council. So it's better mission as well, shouldn't I? It's my pleasure today, this afternoon, to be welcoming and introducing our guest speaker, Ivan Shaw, and also, I don't know much about, but I can tell you that Ivan was born in Novi Sad in Yugoslavia in 1939, a city roughly the size of Leicester, situated about 80 miles north of Belgrade. Apparently life was pretty normal until the German invasion in May 1944, and Ivan's parents were deported and he never saw them again. 5-year-old Ivan spent 10 days in a transit camp and had only escaped being sent to the camps by his aunt, who bravely rescued him and hid him for 7 months and looked after him for 3 years. I'm not sure how much else I put in. I'm sure we're going to cover most of the next bit of the story, so I'll let that out. Life continued to be difficult, though, after the end of the war, as Yugoslavia became a communist country. And in 1947, Ivan was sent to England and adopted by a different aunt. Other than family, Ivan didn't tell anyone about his experiences, so no one at the Marks and Spencer store in Baker Street, where he worked for so many years, knew of his past. Ivan was also a magistrate working in adult youth and family court. Ivan was a magistrate for 24 years and volunteered for the Prince's Trust for a number of years. And Ivan sat on adoption panels, keen to use his own experience to help others. I believe you joined the adoption panel of the Intercountry Adoption Centre in 2011 and sat as an independent panel member until you retired only a couple of years ago, sitting on 2 local authority adoption panels for some years as well. And more recently, Ivan became a volunteer guide at Kenwood House. He received the British Empire Medal and New Year's Honours in 2022 for services to Holocaust education and awareness. He married to Eileen for 58 years, the father to 3 children, one of whom is Philip, who is here with us this afternoon. He's also grandfather of 6, and we're looking forward to hearing Philip's presentation as well on being a family member of the second generation within the survivor. Ivan only began speaking publicly of his experiences about 6 years ago, as the memories were just too painful. But he was persuaded to tell his story. He didn't talk about it for a very long time, but he didn't hide it. All his family knew, inevitably, but he didn't wear it on his sleeve. It was too painful. But he was eventually persuaded that in an era of increasing anti-Semitism and intolerance, he should speak out. So he started 6 years ago when he was a mere 17 years old. He has been touring schools around the country, sharing his experiences, something he said is very satisfying because children are very interested. Since the pandemic, he's also been doing talks on Zoom, but knows that it's not as good as talking to the pupils actually in the schools face to face. So it's my pleasure and honour to be able to welcome you, having zoomed across from North London, to be here with us in person. I believe before you're talking, we're going to hear a tiny bit from Philip about what it was like living with you for all those years, so the experiences that you have been through, all the experiences.
I think it's probably best if I pass on most of my experiences with my father as a child. But the second generation programme is a very important one, partly because it engages people like me to continue telling my father's story, but partly because many of the children of Holocaust survivors were indeed survivors, or become survivors, because the people who came back from the Holocaust were so impacted by their experiences that it impacted their roles as husbands, as fathers, and for many people in my generation, that has also had a big impact. But really I'm here to introduce just like my father, and my father's story, one whose relevance seems to be sadly growing and not receding. I'm part of the Holocaust Education Trust second generation programme, and when I got involved a few years ago, my initial motivation was that I thought it might be something nice to do with my dad. To join him in schools and elsewhere as he told his story to a new generation. Some nice father-son bonding time. The other reason I became involved, which you might find a little strange, was Napoleon. At school, I was fascinated by the French Revolution, the rise and fall of Napoleon Bonaparte, the French Emperor, who died in 1821, 149 years before I was born. It's a fascinating period of history, but it was, to me, just history, stories from another time in schoolwork. It's now 84 years since the start of the Second World War. We are now more than halfway there in terms of the time between Napoleon's death and my birth and the Holocaust versus today. And the Holocaust cannot be allowed to just become pages in a history book. It is incumbent on my generation to make sure that our parents' stories are told for as long as possible so that they remain real and current and relevant. Now by my father, next by me, and maybe even one day by my children. So I'm really doing this to make sure that I can do justice to what is a warning from history that very sadly we seem to be ignoring, and I think we do so at our peril. And with that I'll hand over to my father so you can hear for yourself his story.
Thank you, Philip, for the introduction. Yesterday, the 27th of January, was Holocaust Memorial Day, as we all know. It was exactly 89 years ago that Auschwitz was liberated by the Russian army. It's a particularly poignant day for me, exactly the day my father died. He died on 27th January 1945. Had the Russians arrived a week earlier, he may have survived. and my life would have panned out very differently. Now, there are two reasons why I began to speak about my past. The first is that people like me, Holocaust survivors, are dying out, and I'm one of the younger ones. Secondly, we're living in a time, especially now, increasing intolerance and hatred of other people because they are different, they have different views, different colour of skin, different culture. So for those two reasons, I decided about 5 years ago to join the Holocaust Education Trust outreach programme. It's not a history lesson of the Holocaust, it's a personal story, it's a survivor's tale, the story of a little boy, his mum and dad happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And worst of all, they happened to be not the minority, they were Jewish. I was born in Yugoslavia. You can see there where it is, how far it is to Auschwitz, Belsen, and Buchenwald. It's city about 80,000 inhabitants at the time, of the size of this census, as I said. 10% were Jewish. And my parents, my family, had lived in the country, part of Austro-Hungary for a very long time. I came across a family tombstone in the local Jewish cemetery, dated 1805, which is the year that Nelson defeated the French at Trafalgar. So we were not joining come ages. Our family lived peacefully in the community for over 200 years. Now, my parents were born in Novi Sad, Hungary. I was born in Novi Sad, Yugoslavia. I go back to the days of Novi Sad, Serbia. So it's three countries, the same city. That's what wars do. They change country without borders. We lived near the city centre, by the cathedral. My parents lived at above. As an only child, unborn my father. See that my father, unborn my mother truly. He had a shop selling electrical goods on the high street. Light bulbs, toasters, kettles, etc. My mother truly was a typical housewife. I think in those days, especially in Yugoslavia, very few women actually worked. Now, Britain, as we all know, declared war on Germany on September the 3rd, 1939. Yugoslavia decided to stay neutral. It refused to allow Germany to march through the country to invade Greece, and remained neutral for the next 18 months. But in April 1941, it was invaded on three sides by Hungary, by Germany, and by Italy. Novi Sad, my family, came under Hungarian control. It had been part of Hungary for a very long time, for centuries before the First World War. After the First World War, Hungary lost 2/3 of its landmass and 1/3 of its population, following the Treaty of Versailles and Treaty of Trianon. And by March, April 1941, the Germans were winning the war. They conquered virtually the whole of Europe apart from Great Britain. And the Germans said to the Hungarians, join me, join my axis, come with me, we're winning, I'll get you back all the lands you lost after the First World War. So Hungary decided to join the German war effort. Now, Hungarians at the beginning did not impose a lot of restrictions, but they did impose some restriction on the Jewish population. We all had to wear a yellow star on our outer garment, even small children aged 2 or 3. And if you were caught outside without a yellow star, you were immediately arrested and probably sent to a labour camp in the east. So there were some restrictions on the Jewish population. But very crucially, Hungary did not send people, Jewish people, to the death camp to Auschwitz or Treblinka. And you can see by the photograph as a child, the photographs were made within 2 months of the German invasion in 1944. My family's life changed completely in March 1944. The Hungarians realized the Germans at that time were losing the war. They tried to put up feelers for the British and the Americans to sue for a separate peace. German intelligence found out, and they decided to invade erstwhile ally Hungary. Novigrad came under German occupation. The transport to the camps began almost immediately in May 1944. And these transports, and they transported within 2 months 430,000 Jews to Hungary, Yugoslavia, Auschwitz. The vast majority never came back. Now the figure 430,000 is the total number of fatalities and deaths and injuries in the whole British Empire and Britain in the whole of the Second World War. So the Germans lost no time. And the transports were in filthy cattle trucks, reeking excrement, and you're on a journey which might last a couple of days if you came from Prague or one of the other city centres like Paris. But if you were picked up in an outlying village, the journey could take 7 or 8 days. You were packed like sardines, virtually no food, no toilet facilities. It was a nightmare. Now these trains contain up to 5,000 prisoners, and certainly in the winter, the train to arrive at Auschwitz with 300 or 400 bodies. The people were just too old and they could not survive. Now the Jews in Novigrad, my parents and their friends, were told to go to assembly point by the local synagogue. My father did not have to go. His father was Jewish, his mother was not. At that time, he would not have had to go. His sisters begged him not to go. And they all survived the war. My mother had no choice. Both her parents were Jewish. My father decided to go with my mother. Now, looking back on it now, did I as a child feel abandoned? Do I feel now that I've been abandoned by my father? He left me to go with my mother? Well, I don't obviously think so, being fair. Before my parents went to the assembly point at the synagogue in Novigrad, they took me to one of my father's sisters called Andrew, who lived nearby. They thought they'd come back, they were going to some sort of labour camp in the east. And the Germans worked on a total deception. Put on these transports, you were told, you're going to a camp somewhere in the east, you tell them the factory worker help him put the job in what effort, and you could be making spare parts of tanks, aeroplanes, even army uniforms for the German army. Hugo Boss, the high-end brand of today, were the major manufacturers of German uniforms throughout the Second World War. The company has subsequently apologized for using slave labor, mainly Jewish, to produce their uniforms. But my father chose to go with my mother. He thought they'd be going to some camp to work in the east, in a factory. He and his wife would come back after the war and collect me. They thought I'd be safe. I wasn't safe, and he never came back. Neither of them came back. Now I was left with my aunt Angie, and I was there for about 10 days before I was betrayed by one of the neighbours. Now again, looking back, what sort of mentality was it that would betray a little boy of 5? Just beggars belief. I just don't understand. But I was betrayed. I was picked up, I was taken to a local prison, put in a solitary cell. I can barely remember crying my eyes out, not knowing what was happening to me. I could just about see the outside back wall through iron bars. I didn't know what happened to me. I didn't know what happened to me when I was left with Aunt Angie. Where were my parents coming back? I was overnight in this solitary cell. I was picked up the following day by the German police and taken to a transit camp near the Hungarian border, probably the same transit camp my parents had been taken some weeks earlier. Now, these transit camps were staging posts, Auschwitz. places, minimal toilet facilities, inedible food, no blankets, no proper beds to sleep in. I cannot imagine now as a child of 5, I would have coped with that scenario. My life had been turned upside down. Someone asked me the other day, one of the schools where I was speaking, how did you survive? I said, I don't know, but I did. I guess somebody had asked us to look after me. Maybe some of my friends, my parents' friends looked after me. But I did survive, but it was a nightmare. Now, when the police collected me from our Andrew to take me to prison and then a transit camp, my aunt Andrew immediately sent a telegram to her sister Ethel, who lived in Birdmaster town about 40 miles away. Ethel was the eldest sister. She was the go-in of the family. The telegram read, "They've taken it, Ivan. What can we do? What shall we do? We have to do something." Now Ethel immediately took the train to Noblesart to try to find out what was happening to me. She managed to bribe some officials, some German officials, to find out. Now, after I'd been in Parents' Camp about 10 days, perhaps a fortnight, I was taken with thousands of other prisoners to the railway station, en route to the railway station. We put on a train to Auschwitz. Now, the road to the station was alongside a large forest, and I was walking along this road being marched forcibly with thousands of other prisoners. And suddenly, out of the forest ran my aunt, Ethel. She grabbed me, took me in her arms, and took us into the forest. The whole incident probably took a couple of minutes. I met a woman many, many years ago, later in the 60s, and she said to me, "You see, I survived them, I was lucky. But I was in the same column of prisoners as you were, and I saw you on, ran out of the woods, and picked you up. You were very lucky. The situation was very chaotic. There were thousands of prisoners, and relatively few guards guarding that part of the prisoners' column. There were actually 2 German guards that saw the whole incident. They just turned the other way. So I guess they must have been German conscripts and not German fanatics, Nazi fanatics. So there were good Germans and bad Germans. Now, my aunt grabbed me, took me into the forest. We hid there for a few days, and she then took me to her house in Burgos. And that is the house, photograph taken a few years ago, hasn't changed a great deal. It's got a big courtyard at the back, a cellar underneath. My aunt Ethel lived there with her daughter, her son-in-law, and her grandson, who was a few years older than I was, and we became like bad brothers. She was a widow. She had married the local butcher of German extraction. Germans had lived in that area, Austro-Hungary, for centuries. So she had a German-sounding surname, and I think possibly for that reason, she wasn't suspected of hiding fugitives. I spent about 8 or 9 months there before the Russians arrived. The country was liberated at the end of 1944. We were free. Now this time, no one had betrayed me. I had been told, stay in the courtyard, stay in the cellar if someone comes in. If someone catches a glimpse of you, do not ever say you're Jewish. Well, this time I was not betrayed. I was lucky. My granddaughter Lulu asked me a few years ago, she said to me, "Grandpa, was what happened to you the same as happened to Anne Frank?" And I said, "Well, I can't really compare myself to Anne Frank. Anne was a teenager, hidden in Holland, in the attic with her parents for 2 years, and she wrote a diary which subsequently became a world bestseller. Anne was betrayed and didn't survive. I was not betrayed. I only spent a few months in hiding. I was very lucky, so I really cannot compare myself to Anne Frank. The Russians arrived at the end of 1944, were liberated. 6 million Jews in Europe were murdered. 1.5 million of these Jews were children. 90% of Jews in Yugoslavia did not survive the war, and more than 90% of Jewish children did not survive the war. So I was really one of the lucky ones. I lived with my family and both of us for the next 3 years after the war. My parents did not return. I remember being glued to the radio. There's a separate radio channel listing the names of people, prisoners who had come back after the camps. My parents' names never came up. Now, what happened to my parents? Towards the end of the war, as the Germans were losing the war, they're transporting prisoners from places like Auschwitz in Poland to Belsen and Buchenwald in Germany. They determined not that as many prisoners as they could be saved. So they was transporting Jews towards the end of the war into Germany. We learned soon after the war, my mother had died in Belsen. She'd been there with her cousin who had survived the war and told the story. My mother had survived until the British Army arrived April 1945. In Belsen. When the British arrived in Belsen in 1945, they found 10,000 unburied bodies. They found 38,000 survivors, 13,000 of whom died subsequently. The British doctors could not save them. They were too ill when the British Army arrived. Unfortunately, my mother was one of them. These surviving prisoners looked like walking skeletons. They were barely alive. Belsen had not been a death camp like Auschwitz, that people had just been worked to death. And so, unfortunately, my mother did not survive after the British arrived. Now, I love these quotes of fate, 6 degrees of separation. The grandfather of my daughter-in-law, Claire, who's here today, was with the British Army at the camp in Belsen. And 60 years later, the grandson of the victim married the granddaughter of the liberator, who couldn't make it up. 6 degrees of separation. And what happened to my father? I didn't know for 56 years. I kept on writing to the tracing authorities, the Red Cross in Geneva, over many decades. And I was going to write, sorry, we have no information. But in 2001, I got a reply from the Red Cross in Geneva saying, we recently had some documentation from the former USSR. We suggest you write to the Museum Auschwitz, they may have some information about your father. So I wrote to the Museum Auschwitz, and got a reply fairly quickly. They replied, your father arrived in Auschwitz in May 1944. He was subsequently transported at the end of the war, on 26th of January, out of Auschwitz to Buchenwald in Germany. We don't know what happened to him in Buchenwald. Why don't you write? Find out. They may have some more information for you. I wrote to Buchenwald and again got a very quick reply. They said, your father arrived on 27th of January 1945, exactly 89 years ago. He was so ill when he arrived in Buchenwald, he couldn't even pronounce his name. And he died on arrival, virtually on arrival. But we identified him by the 2 number on his arm. Now, can you imagine the scenario? The Germans are losing the war, before the Russian artillery could be heard in the camp at Auschwitz, they were still transporting prisoners from Auschwitz with passenger lists. So there was some clerk, some civil servant, writing passenger lists, name, arrival in Auschwitz, place of origin, the 2 number. So when my father arrived in Portugal with his passenger list, they would able to identify him. And you can't work out the madness of this bureaucracy. But anyway, they were able to identify him, and that actually gave me closure. So I did eventually find out, 56 years after my father disappeared, what happened to him. And my mother survived 7 months Auschwitz. Sorry, my father survived 7 months hell, my mother 11 months of hell. And the Russians came to Auschwitz earlier, and the British liberated the camp in Belsen earlier. Who knows? My parents, they both survived. Now, before the war in 1938, my mother's sister Magda and husband George decided to settle in England, in London. But they were economic migrants. They were refugees. They had no idea what was on the horizon. But they came for a better life. My Uncle George had been a salesman selling fabrics made in Huddersfield all across Central Europe. He met my aunt Magda in the late 1920s in Berlin, and that's where he worked from originally. When Hitler came to power in 1953, he moved to Belgrade and continued selling British fabrics, Yorkshire fabrics, around Central Europe. So he had some contacts in Britain. He was able to settle in London, and he came, as I said, as an economic migrant. Now, when we found out my parents had not come back from their camps, they decided to try to adopt me. And I was there in Yugoslavia for 3 years. It took 3 years for the British to allow me to come in, and we were asked to allow me to leave the country. So I was there living with Ethel and her daughter, son-in-law, and grandson for the next 3 years. And there was many discussions backwards and forwards in 3 years. My aunt Ethel wanted to keep me. By that time, I'd become a member of the family. I was happy there with my cousin. I didn't want to go. I knew nobody in England. I could not speak a word of English. And I really didn't want to come here. But Ethel decided after long discussions that I'd have a better life in England. Yugoslavia in 1947 was a pretty grim place. Yugoslavia was invaded by the Germans, by the Russians, and then there'd been a civil war after the war, and the communists had come out on top. So we were living under communist dictatorship, Marshal Tito. So life in Yugoslavia was pretty grim, very little food in the shops, did not blackouts. The future looked pretty bleak. And with a very, very heavy heart, Aunt Ethel decided to have a better life here, and they agreed I would come here. So my Uncle George decided to try to adopt me. As I said earlier, it was not easy. And it could have very easily sent money, but he chose not to, because after all, he would easily send money. He had no idea what sort of child would come, how traumatized I would become, and he lost my parents at an early age, and having been in hiding for some months. But he decided to try to adopt me. Now, as I said, they had no idea what I looked like, so they sent this photograph, 1947. Look, this is what I looks like. That's me on the left-hand side with Ethel and my cousin officer. Now, my Uncle George sent his cousin Miklos to collect me. He couldn't come himself. I was dragged, literally kicking and screaming, to railway station photos. Aunt Ethel fainted with distress. I did not want to come here. I didn't know my aunt and uncle. I couldn't speak a word of the language. I was happy where I was. We took a train to Belgrade, stayed there overnight, and then flew to London the following day. When we arrived at London Airport, it was Northolt in those days, my uncle's cousin said, look, over there are your new parents. I just looked the other way. I didn't want new parents. I wanted my old parents back. I didn't understand really what happened to them, why they had never come back. We spent an hour driving from London Airport to Hampshire. I was taken to my new house, and my aunt and uncle took me to my new bedroom. And wow! In this bed was a brand new bicycle. I suddenly began to look up. I couldn't believe bicycles for me. Unbelievable. So life suddenly began to look up a bit. The following day, they took me shopping. My aunt took me shopping to the local high street in Hampshire, went to Woolworths, Sainsbury's, local butcher, Ringers and so on. I couldn't believe the range of goods available on the shops, especially the meats and the cheeses and so on. I couldn't believe it. And I gave a talk about it a couple of days ago, and the interviewer said to me, well, if you came to England, you had rationing, very little food. I said, well, it's all relative. And I couldn't believe what was on display in the UK. I went to school almost immediately. I couldn't speak a word of English. Now, you go to any school today, there are lots of children who can't speak English or speak very little, or where English is not the first language at home. In those days, I was the only child in the school who wasn't English and couldn't speak the language. And one incident came to mind. The teacher was teaching English numbers in English, and wrote on the board the numbers 1, asked me to repeat 1, 2, I repeat 2, 3, I repeat 3. Eventually children behind me began to sort of chatter, and the teacher told me, shut up! I said, shut up, thinking that was the next number. Honestly, the children, but I'm not laughing. I planned out my first years in England, but they were, because I think they were pretty miserable. I'd been taken up as a child to a strange country, not knowing anybody, able to understand a single word of language. In fact, I wrote a letter to Margaret short after I arrived here. I just don't understand English. It sounds to me like dogs barking, completely incomprehensible. But I do have happy memories of my teenage years, so I guess at the end of the day, I must have been quite adaptable. A friend asked me recently, how can I say that I've been lucky with my background? Well, as I have been lucky. Yes, I had a terrible start, lost my parents, but I then embraced my 3 loving families. My aunt's family, who saved my life in Yugoslavia, my aunt's family in England, who adopted me, and I then married into a loving family, and I married Ivan, and quite wonderful in-laws, the Tuckers. So I came to a prosperous family in England. I went to a good school, followed by Leeds University. I graduated with a degree in textile engineering. Before joining Marks and Spencer's, I had a satisfactory career. So yes, overall, I have been lucky. I and I had a happy marriage lasting nearly 60 years. And this is a picture taken nearly 10 years ago, about 50th wedding anniversary, with my 3 children and 6 grandchildren. I've been told off now that this picture's told. I've got to update it, and for next time I will update it. So this family photo taken nearly 10 years ago, showing my 3 children and 6 grandchildren. I called my revenge on Hitler. Hitler was determined to eliminate my family, and he did not succeed. And this picture shows it. So I was brought up in this country, in the home counties. I wasn't born here. But I did acquire in the process an English veneer. I had got over to my family in Yugoslavia, now Serbia. I do believe you should never forget where you come from. One thing I've learned from life experience is that actually there were good people and bad people. You know, I was betrayed by someone evil. I was saved by wonderful people who risked their lives. Had my Airtel been betrayed, the house would have been burned down, she and her family would have been shot. Who can say they would have taken that risk? I'm not sure I say that, but risk she did, huge risk. And the Nazis succeeded almost eliminating most of my family. place at the wrong time. And luckiest of all, it happened on the wrong minority, as the Roma, disabled people, and other minorities made a similar thing. Many Holocaust survivors didn't talk about their experience afterwards, even to their families. Almost without exception, we focus on the future. Strangers in a strange land, we burnt homes, careers, married, had children, and brought new life into the world. Only after we had secured the future could we look back at the past. Now, the Holocaust was a unique event. It involved a government systematically planning to kill 11 million Jews on an industrial scale. Luckily, war stopped them. In 1945, they managed to achieve half their target. It was, in terms of scale, it was a unique situation. But there have been terrible genocides since the liberation of Auschwitz 89 years ago. Genocides in Rwanda, Bosnia, Cambodia, and Darfur. And we now have the abyss in Ukraine and the terrible war in the Middle East, which has unleashed a wave of anti-Semitism that would not be possible in this country. I always believed that what happened in Germany could never happen here. After October this year, I'm not so sure the rise of anti-Semitism in this country and elsewhere. I think we all have to be aware of the power of prejudice, heated hatred. We have to oppose hatred whenever we see it, and prejudice whenever we come across it. We should not look the other way, as many did in the past. Take extremes, we've seen what hatred, intolerance can do. Take extremes can lead to the gas chambers of Auschwitz. J.K. Rowling was attacked some months ago by transgender views. Some people even suggested that we burn her books. Well, the Germans began by burning books, ended up by burning people. Beware where extreme prejudice can lead. Those that forget their history are in danger of repeating it. Unfortunately, we have forgotten large part of our history, we're now repeating it. It never been more important than today to fight prejudice and hatred, now fueled, very much fueled by social media. Finally, let me quote primarily by the Italian author and survivor of Auschwitz. It happened, therefore it can happen again. It happened, therefore it can happen again. Never is that true, more true than today. Thank you very much.
Those that know me will know I'm not normally lost for words, but truly after I am lost for words. There's not really much I can say following that, apart from the testimony given just beautifully highlights why we must never, ever, ever forget. I now invite Rabbi Hyman to recite the memorial prayer.
Please be upstanding. Memorial prayer for the victims of the Holocaust and those who perished in other genocides, recited first in English and then in Hebrew. God, who is full of compassion, may grant perfect rest beneath the wings of the divine presence. The 6 million Jewish men, women, and children were ruthlessly murdered by the Nazis in local operations, and to those who have perished in other genocides. We beg you, Lord of compassion, shelter them forevermore. rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. El Mole Rachamim, Shlochen Bamramim, Ametzim L'chol V'nom, Racham, Kanat Le'ashechino, Yemal V'tiroshim Torim, Zohar, Arakiam Mazhirim, Es Nishmois, Rivavas Alate Yisrael, Anoshim Tav, Shenehergu Veshenishchatu, Sheneachneku Veshenisreku, Veshenikuru Chaim, Akidush Hashem, Midem Raktim, Agirmanim Vadvehem, Gan Elohim Mikol Hogamim, Anav Rachamim, Yahdirem Yisitim Nafar Elohim, Yitzro Rachayim et Nishmosom, Abnoi Nacharosom, Migan Eden Tehei Menuchosom, V'yonuchu Shalom, Am Yishkovam, V'nomar, Amen.
students from Southend High School for Girls to share their work around their study on the Holocaust.
Thank you. Freedom, something so intrinsic to our being, is able to be eroded in the 6 years of Hitler's rule, where 6 million Jewish people were killed. As the scholar Stanton described 10 stages of genocide, it was a gradual, insidious change that brought the brutal restriction of Jewish people across Eastern Europe and Germany. Beginning as soon as the Nazis seized power in 1933, anti-Jewish legislation was immediately passed, restricting the freedom of identity. It was 1935 when the Nuremberg laws restricting the freedom to marry and love between Jewish and non-Jewish people were passed. By the 9th of November 1938, this poison erupted into the abhorrent violence that was the November pogrom, where 7,000 Jewish shops and businesses were destroyed, and 30,000 innocent Jewish men were arrested. By the start of the Second World War, communities were forced into ghettos, deported to concentration camps, or by its end, sentenced to death camps, their imprisonment the antithesis of freedom. Despite the anti-Semitic climate of Nazi Germany, there were some, a significant, inspiring minority, who risked their life for freedom. The White Rose Group, who demonstrated with valiant youth culture, standing up to the perpetrator regime, who fought for their freedom until their death. Freedom was never, and has never been, an easy path. Being physically liberated from Nazi persecution did not mean a liberated mind and free life. For many, it was a long, arduous road ahead for the prisoners, who were often unable to return home and had to rebuild their lives from scratch. Many were physically free, but not mentally free. But many were able to enjoy their newfound freedom and liberation. Holocaust survivor Alec Wood remarked when he came to Southampton, he was intoxicated with the freedom of England and the kindness and thoughtfulness of the English people. It is this England that we need to preserve. Freedom remains vulnerable to Stanton's final stage of genocide, denial. It is this denial that breeds distortion of the Holocaust today, and thus minimises its significance and legacy on the world. It is therefore our duty to preserve the memory of the Holocaust and the intrinsic value of freedom that comes with it.
As a young person standing before you today, I'm aware of the weight of history and the responsibility we bear to remember the Holocaust. Though the events occurred before my time, the echoes of the past urge us to reflect, to emphasise and to ensure that the lessons learned are not lost. We, the younger generation, may not have witnessed the horrors firsthand, but we are the torchbearers of memory. It is our responsibility to ensure that the stories of survivors are not restricted to history books alone, but rather they live on in our hearts, minds and conversations. Firstly, it is important to spread stories of Holocaust survivors to ensure that the victims are not forgotten. Each life lost during the Holocaust had its own story, dreams and aspirations. It is our moral duty to honour that memory, to acknowledge the pain and suffering they endured, and to ensure their stories are passed down through generations. Secondly, awareness of the Holocaust is essential for educating current and future generations. We are the last generation who will have the opportunity to speak to survivors of the Holocaust, so the responsibility falls on us to transmit the lessons learned. The Holocaust is a stark warning against the dangers of indifference, silence, and the erosion of human rights. By understanding the past, we equip ourselves with the knowledge to recognise the early signs of discrimination and injustice, empowering us to take a stand against them. As a member of the Jewish community, I have seen firsthand the effects of anti-Semitism. Education is antidote to ignorance, and by spreading accurate information about the Holocaust, we challenge stereotypes that contribute to anti-Semitic attitudes. Also, as we learn about the atrocities committed against the Jewish people, we forge a connection with the survivors. This connection is a catalyst for unity, inspiring collective action against anti-Semitism. The Holocaust survivor and Nobel Peace Laureate Elie Wiesel quoted, "To forget the dead would be akin to killing him a second time." This quote is impactful, as it encapsulates the importance of ensuring that the atrocities committed during the Holocaust are not erased from as forgetting their stories will be a disservice to their lives and a failure to acknowledge their pain and sacrifice and preserve human dignity. As forgetting the Holocaust is disregarding the humanity of those who suffered. In essence, this quote encapsulates the idea that remembering the Holocaust is not just a historical obligation, but a moral imperative. It urges us to carry the weight of the past to shape the future marked by understanding and tolerance.
In this context, education is necessary. Without education, no one will remember the pain and suffering of the Holocaust. I spoke to one person about me wanting to partake in this remembrance ceremony. When I brought up the fact that at the height of the Holocaust, 1.6 million Jews could have been gassed in the chambers every year, their response was, I forgot that they used gas against the Jewish people. This statement not only is concerning, but proves to both you and I that there needs to be more work done on education. In 2019, 5% of people surveyed in the UK believe that the Holocaust did not happen at all. A further 8% of those surveyed believe that the facts of the Holocaust were exaggerated. I will make this clear here and now. There is no exaggeration of the breakups of families. There is no exaggeration of the hate spread. And there is no exaggeration of the 6 million murdered from that genocide. We must never forget the fear, never forget the pain, and never forget the suffering. For if we forget, then darkness, ignorance rises. And when ignorance rises, history repeats itself. We must forbid this conclusion. As the great work of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, the Holocaust Education Trust, World Jewish Relief, and many more will be undone. Freedom is fragile, as freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. So how can we deal with this undeniable threat? Well, of course, education is vital to get these facts to as many people as possible. Schools must take their responsibility for teaching the Holocaust seriously, making sure young people understand the facts of the genocide. Those who know the facts and know the horrors should do their utmost to secure our generation's united understanding of these unforgettable events. I do also firmly believe that the only way to truly understand the extent of this state of humanity is to see it for yourself, and therefore believe that anyone who can should visit these death camps, so that all understand where freedom goes to die. Many lost their freedom before. We must never let it happen again.
The importance of learning about the Holocaust is still very relevant today. Although there are obligatory lessons about the Holocaust in the school curriculum, we must take an extra step ourselves to deeply understand the significance this event had on millions of lives and its legacy today. As young people, it can be easy to distance ourselves from the historical past and just focus on the factual details taught by school, instead of trying to comprehend the past on an emotional level. One way we can connect with the impact of the Holocaust is through listening to the survivors' stories and how it affected them and their loved ones, through books, documents and films. When read or watched, it's hard to comprehend these wicked events even took place. We must realise that these are real people's lives and not just names in a textbook. In addition to this, it is just as important to learn about the build-up to the Holocaust and why it's occurred, because we can realise how subtle anti-Semitism can escalate and turn humans against humans. Although it can be easy for us to disregard a repeat of these events, we still need to learn the lesson from the past of how easily anti-Semitism can open the door to mass genocide. As young people, we must learn the important lesson that we need to challenge discrimination and hatred where we find it. Therefore, it is our duty as young people to educate the future generations about the causes and consequences of the Holocaust and pass down the survivors' messages long after they have gone. As we have all reminded you, many lost their freedom before, and our generation must commit to never letting it happen again. Thank you for asking us to speak today.
member of the Youth Parliament has taken his place, and together with the Deputy Youth Mayor, Edward Melville, they will each read a poem.
Do not ask, how did you survive? Because this is a question that causes me pain and brings back memories. I know that you mean well and are sympathetic, and would like me to talk to your youth group, with your son who is writing a paper on the Holocaust, and I could help him with the subject, which is part of his exams. You add with a smile that no amount of reading is the same as talking to a survivor. From your eager expression, I can guess what you expect me to tell him about our bravery and how our faith in God helped us to survive. I lie and say I am too busy, that I have other commitments, and quickly take my leave and turn away, so that you cannot see the hurt in my eyes. Do not ask me why.
The following reading is titled Bells from Silence. This poem was written by Yola Lewis, who served in the British 11th Armoured Division, which liberated the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in April 1945. Long gone the sound of battle from this foreign dell, as we tread again the Belsen grass, remembering comrades, young men all, who died to reach this awful hell. Hallowed now for eternity, as the clouds from memory swiftly pass. Listen then, can't you hear the silence here around, telling us of terror and ancient bestial fear? How real is this silence that permeates from underground? Only 50 years ago, but now, forever the silence condemns. For here there lie anonymous neath the soil as they reverently bow, remnants of the living dead whose silence still transmits, transcends. Listen to the silence still, and lift your head on high. Are you waiting for a question, or an answer, a void to fill? Quicken then the pulse, breathe deeper still, answer the silence to question, why?
As the formal proceedings start to draw to a close, the Southend Boys and Girls Choirs will now perform 5 short pieces of music.
The secret place was a shadow of
are some words of explanation from the composer of When I Am Silent. In the fall of 1994, while on a tour of Eastern Europe, I spent a day at the site of the Nazi concentration camp in Auschwitz, Poland. Even though I had studied the history and knew the facts, I was unprepared for the strong feelings I experienced there. I was especially moved by the pictures lining the walls of one of the former dormitories, pictures of young women and teenage boys and girls who died there. The pictures looked like my students, young people with their lives still in front of them. But these young people had no chance to see their future. I was haunted by the picture of one especially beautiful young girl, and in the days which followed, as I thought about the things she might have enjoyed and the life which was cruelly taken from her, the words and music for When I Am Silent evolved. This song is dedicated to this girl and all young people everywhere whose lives are taken unjustly. Sing it for them.
Who will count the
Councillor C. Habermel to give the concluding thoughts.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Once again, we've been touched by today's speakers, sharing their stories and experiences with us. I wish to formally thank Philip and Ivan Shaw for being with us here today. We hold this annual commemoration in the highest esteem, and with it our shared understanding of the horrors of the Holocaust. It is important to reflect and ensure a stronger future, particularly in these challenging times. It is important to reflect back on a time that must never be repeated. There are no excuses for extreme behaviour to dehumanize others. We hope that we can be a leading community to ensure we understand and learn from these horrors. I'd like to say a few thank yous for today. Thanks for the preparation and delivery of today go to Rabbi Hyman and Rabbi and to my chaplain, Reverend Abraham. I'd also like to thank other councillors who are members of the Holocaust Memorial Day Working Party in their support. Rosemary Pennington needs to be mentioned for a continued drive to develop new speakers for this event and the associated activity. Other council officers include Sharon Wheeler, the technical support, Toni Mair, the filming service, and Robert Harris. Many thanks also for the musical contributions from the Sons Piano Trio, Roger Humphrey, and the Southend Boys and Girls Chorus. I'd also like to thank Southend High School for their presentation and the poetry readings by the Youth Member of Parliament and Deputy Youth Mayor. And finally, I would like to invite you to join me for refreshments, which are available in the foyer outside the Council Chamber. This will also give us an opportunity to view the exhibitions which are on display out there. Thank you.